Welcome to episode 17 of The Rational Homer. I am your host Kyle as we enter the final full week of August. Andy will not be joining me today as he has a child infected this week, and I am wishing him the best and his wife, especially good times as the late nights will soon be upon them. Today I'll be discussing the Iowa cloudy quarterback situation, talking more about Iowa State football, and discussing NL MVP race between Shohei Ohtani and Pete Crow Armstrong, as well as looking at the divisions briefly. Looking at the Iowa quarterback situation as their race heats up between Hank Brown and Jeremy Howes, the transfer from Wake Forest. It seems like both have had good days and both have had bad days. Ferentz called the situation cloudy last week, and it doesn't seem like it's any more clear heading into this week, or heading towards the end of this week, as the season begins. Week one officially begins next week. We saw Brown a little bit last year in a couple games against Indiana. I wasn't too impressed with his tough situation being thrown in against the national champion, or eventual national champion. I haven't seen much film on Helsinki besides the open practice that Iowa had, where he threw 5 touchdowns, I think it was. And the reports are that Ferentz liked Brown a little bit better because he doesn't seem to turn the ball over as much, whereas with Helsinki, there's that risk factor. And Iowa's going to be running the ball a lot, I would have to guess, with Moulton, and just trying to control the clock like they normally do. But there is definitely a concern at the quarterback situation, and I've seen a lot of reports that the first 3 games are considered like preseason where they each might get to play. And I'm not really a fan of that going into the season because I don't feel like the offense can really get into the rhythm if they're taking turns at quarterback, even if it's against the teams that they play. One of them being Iowa State. I mean, I hope they would do that against Iowa State because I feel like that would greatly benefit Iowa State chances in that game, especially with their defense and their defensive end. But the report is that Iowa is apparently just going to be able to dominate Iowa State in the trenches. And that would kind of be how Iowa wins the game if they're currently favored by 11.5 over Iowa State. But Iowa opens up against Northern Illinois on September 5th on the Big Ten Network, and both quarterbacks will get to play. As I previously said, I'm not really a fan of that. I don't feel like either of them can get into a rhythm. But Iowa sees Northern Illinois, Iowa State, and Northern Iowa as the pregame for Big Ten play, as the first 3 games in the Big Ten are at Michigan versus Ohio State, then at Washington, which are some pretty tough games. I feel like they should go with Helsinki, even if there's more of a risk factor. I feel like he has more mobility and seems to be, I think personally, it seems like the better choice based off, characteristics in Iowa's offense, and knowing that Hank Brown is okay, but I don't feel like he's fully ready yet to be a starting quarterback and for those big moments. But we'll keep tabs on that. We'll definitely have an update next week on who the start is going to be going into week one, or if they're going to rotate possessions, or what they're going to do there. And moving over to Iowa State, really liking their team. Like listening to the interviews, hearing the coaches talk. I'm extremely confident with Jalen Radar at quarterback. Watched him multiple times at Arkansas State, as I said previously. Just a good situation there. Dylan Florida at running back, it seems like, and punt returner, which is always good. Iowa State opens up the season at home against SC Missouri on September 5th at noon. So I'll be able to watch them and then the Iowa game. And they play Iowa the following week on NBC and play Bowling Green at home. That was originally supposed to be an away game. I believe Iowa State blacked that out so that it was a home game. And they play Utah, West Virginia at BYU. And those are all going to be pretty tough games. And at Arizona's going to be tough. Okie State might be tough. Baylor, Cincinnati, UCF, and Kansas State. So those are all going to be very interesting games. I feel like we'll have a good feel. I have a good feel on how I feel about Iowa State as a whole after the Utah game. Because that'll be the 4th game of the year. I feel like adjustments should have been made. We kind of know who the key players are. Utah's not going to be an easy game. It's ranked in the top 25 currently. I'm looking at the schedule for the rest of the league, and it's a couple good games in week 0. We got the Dublin game again, the Aer Lingus College Football Classic. Ohio State beat Kansas State last year in that, but that's between North Carolina and TCU this year, as TCU is favored by 7.5, as Bill Belichick might be in the final season as the coach of North Carolina, depending upon how this year goes. And then the other semi-competitive game, semi-popular games are going to be San Jose State versus USC. USC should win that pretty easily as they're favored by 38.5. NC State plays Virginia. Then there's a couple smaller schools. Another big one is Hawaii plays Stanford. And then Memphis plays UNLV, which is definitely an interesting matchup to open the season. So those are the first week, some of the important first week games. And then next week will be a fuller week with all the teams playing. Be much more fun. Moving over to baseball. Talking about the NL MVP race, we got Pete Crow Armstrong versus Shohei Ohtani. And a couple weeks ago, Pete Crow Armstrong had 3-1 odds to win MVP, and he's now doing much better and actually the favorite to win MVP over Shohei, as PCA's numbers across the board are currently as of 9:30 on August 25th. 33 home runs, 83 RBIs, 32 stolen bases, 278 average. So he's in the 30-30 club. He could potentially reach the 40-40 club. We'd have to start stealing some more bags. I think he could easily reach 40 home runs. He has 7 triples. Definitely a speed guy. Was an all-star for the Cubs. Then you got his defense. This is also obviously important. He has a .98% fielding percentage with 339 putouts and 350 attempts, 5 assists and 6 errors in over 1,100 innings, which is pretty good, I would say. Comparing that to Shohei Ohtani, who has about similar home runs. He has 30 home runs. He has 80 RBIs. Only 9 stolen bases. He is hitting a little bit better as he's hitting 288. And then Ohtani is primarily a DH, and he did pitch up until July for the Dodgers. And that's kind of an interesting debate of a pitcher versus an everyday defender. And he actually pitched pretty well, as he's 8-2 with a 1.79 ERA in 14 games. He threw 85 innings, and he has 95 strikeouts. So his pitching numbers are pretty insane, but like I said, he hasn't thrown since, I believe it was June was the last time he threw against the Padres. So his pitching numbers are extremely solid. His hitting is pretty equal to PCA, and he's also a 4-time MVP. He won the AL MVP in 21 and 23. He won the NL MVP in 24 and 25. So he's looking for the three-peat in the NL, and that's just kind of interesting because Ohtani is definitely I call the golden goose of baseball. He's the most known. I mean, if you ask any baseball fan, they're going to know who Shohei Ohtani is. Even if you ask most common person, they're going to know who Shohei Ohtani is because it's just such a popular name. And kind of the face of baseball right now. Is definitely the face of the Cubs and getting more popularity. But he does get into a little bit more trouble. He had that run in with a fan in Chicago against the White Sox. Said some not very nice things through the fence. But since then, he's been on a tear. And the White Sox fans apparently are kind of known for fighting, as there was a fight last week in the Cubs White Sox series in the bleachers, and then this week there was another fight posted, or from this weekend, another fight was posted with the Mets against the White Sox, and the fan literally jumped down 3 rows and drop kicked somebody. It's a pretty insane video to see, but the White Sox are doing good. So I can't really say too much about that. They currently have a 2.5 game lead over the Cleveland Guardians, a 4.5 game lead over the Twins. They're 5 games above 500. They have a positive run differential at 34. And the interesting thing with that is the only other team with a positive run differential in that division is the Detroit Tigers at plus 70. but they are 9 games below 500 and 7 games out of first place. Looking at the rest of the American League, we got the Rays are still holding on to first place in the AL East with a 3.5 game lead over the New York Yankees. Boston Red Sox have made a complete charge. They're only 6 games back now at 72 and 59, and Tampa Bay is 78 and 53. That's pretty impressive, and Tampa Bay is one of the lowest budgeted teams in baseball, although they did make a few deadline acquisitions. Toronto's 14.5 back, and the Blue and Baltimore Orioles are 15 back. Both those teams have a below 20% chance of making the playoffs. Moving over to the AL West, the Rangers are in first place by half a game over the Houston Astros, as the Rangers sit at 500 exactly, 66 and 66. Jacob DeGrom declined being traded at the deadline, and the Rangers have continued to battle for first place. That's the AL West kind of a three-team race right now, with the Rangers, Astros, and Mariners are 3 games back, as the Angels and Athletics are have less than a 0.1% chance of making the playoffs if they're 14 and 15 games out, and they're really just in another rebuild year. Moving over to the National League, the Braves still have a 3.5 game lead on the Phillies, and the Phillies continue to make their charge. The Braves are 21 games over 500 at 76 and 55, and they play much better at home than on the road. They're about a 500 team on the road, about 20 games above 500 at home, and they're kind of on a bit of a skid as they're 3 and 7 in their last 10 games. The Phillies are much closer to the medium for both, 38 and 30 at home and 35 and 29 on the road. The Marlins are 9.5 back, so they're kind of out of, at least out of the division, might not be out of the wild card. Moving over to the Central, the Brewers are still 5.5 games up on the Cubs as they sit 81 and 50 with a 161 run differential, which is the best in baseball. And their offense is just solid, all around solid team. 10 games above 500 on the road. Great bullpen. Not much else to say about them. The Cubs, 5.5 back. 20 games above 500. 5 and 5 in their last 10 games. Blew a couple games this past weekend against the Mariners. Bullpen gave up a walk-off homer and a walk-off single. Tough game for the bullpen. I wish the bullpen was a bit stronger, but hopefully they'll get David Valencia back eventually for closing games, as Jacob Webb is a pretty solid setup man, but not really a closer material in my opinion. And that's kind of what they've been doing, is playing magical chairs with the closer role since the Valencia injury. Moving over to the AL West, you got the Dodgers with a 9.5 game lead, and the best record in baseball at 80 and 51, and they've won 6 in a row after their skid in early August, towards the end of July as well. And they're 9.5 up on the Padres, as the Padres are 10 games above 500 and only have a run differential of 15. The Diamondbacks are 11.5 back. They have a 30% chance of making the playoffs. They'd have to go on a bit of a run, and last night, after getting shut out by the Cubs 7-0, I think they're gonna have a tough time as their head coach, or their manager and their top bench coach, who are accusing the Cubs of stealing signs from third base, which is a very interesting accusation. Because Merrill Kelly was the pitcher, and if he's tipping his pitches, it's not really on the Cubs. He's had a very down year compared to previous years, so kind of a situation where maybe the Cubs were stealing signs, but also historically he hasn't been great this year, so it's not like it's that surprising he had a bad game. Moving over to the wildcard race, the wildcard spot, they have a 9 game lead. Boston pretty clear as well, as they have a 6.5 game lead. Then you got the Guardians wrapping up the third wildcard spot, followed closely by the Astros half a game back, Twins 2 games back, the Blue Jays 2 games back, and Baltimore 2.5 games back. So it's a pretty tight race for the American League third wildcard spot. All those teams have negative run differentials, which doesn't really mean much, but it is an interesting statistic. Moving over to the National League, Cubs have a 5 game lead on the wild card spot, followed by the Phillies, who have a 2-game lead over the third spot. Padres currently have the third spot. They have a 2-game lead on the Diamondbacks, 4-game lead on the Marlins, 5-game lead on St. Louis, and a 7.5-game lead on Pittsburgh. And all those wildcard teams in the National League, except for St. Louis, have a positive run differential. That's just a very interesting note. Let's take a look at the Cubs' upcoming schedule. As they continue to push for the division, they should be playing the Brewers here in September. And so they finished this week with finished Wednesday with Arizona, then traveled by town to play Cincinnati, then have a 4-game series against the Brewers. And we just can't seem to get past the pesky Brewers. If we can win 3 or 4 from the Brewers, we can go back to fighting for the division, but the Brewers just seem to have our number. We have 7 games left in the season against the Brewers, so a lot can still happen in terms of the division, but it starts with beating the Brewers. And that will wrap it up for this week's podcast. Don't know if Andy will be back next week. Might be one of his brothers potentially joining me to discuss the opening preview of the college football game, official week 1, but I hope everyone has a good week. And remember, if you have any questions or comments or suggestions for sports-related content you'd like me to react to, send an email to rationalhomer@gmail.com.